This is Donovan Doust from NewSchoolPOKERstrat. Today I just wanted to talk a little bit about pre-flop poker before getting into the meat of most of my strategy lessons, which are going to concentrate on post-flop play. There's a lot of good information out there on pre-flop ranges and pre-flop poker, and I don't really see a big need to reinvent the wheel. But I do think there are a couple places I can help out conceptually, and I also think that it could be helpful to address the sort of paradigm shift that's taking place now in the post-boom era. Now that we're getting beyond just tight, aggressive razor-fold poker, so let's take a look at the two kind of paradigms. In the old school paradigm, we had very indoctrinated ranges based on position. Like, everybody knew sort of what range I am at least representing to have when I open from early position, mid position, late position. 3 times the big blind was standard, starting with the best hand most of the time, and charging your opponents to draw against it was sort of the name of the game. And you were really raising to win the pot, and you were calling for pot odds. Now, the reason, well, let's see, how do I explain this? C-betting, when you were C-betting, you were just printing money, say circa 2006, 2007, because the idea was, if I put in the last raise pre-flop and you only called, you were not representing that you had me beat. You were sort of just saying, okay, I don't know if I have the best hand, but I think if I catch the flop, I can make money. So you're the last person to put in a raise is supposed to have the best hand. So when you have an uncapped range, for instance, if I raise and somebody calls, I'm allowed to have pocket kings, he's not. I'm allowed to have aces, he's not. He's not supposed to have ace king there. So when the flop comes out, rag, 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 and he checks and I bet, I don't have to represent anything to win the pot. I'm just betting that he missed, because I already repped a bigger hand by him than him before the flop, because I put in the last raise. If he was planning to set up a post-flop bluff, he probably would have re-raised before the flop. That was just the way the game flow went. Compare the indoctrinated ranges, 3 times the big blinds, just standard, +1 per limper. Starting with the best hand and charging opponents to draw out means that if you think that your hand is best, you're not going to flat call, you're going to re-raise. Raising to win the pot, calling for pot odds, all of that meant that continuation betting was just printing money automatically on the flop. Compare that to the new school with much more dynamic ranges. They're flexible. You're going to have one player is going to have very different ranges, especially like when we get into late position and blind play than another. Dynamic raise sizing, I see this particularly in tournament play. But even in cash game, a lot of the players are varying the size of their raises, at least based on position. And in tournaments, some players will open up for 4 times the big blind in early position, 3 times the big blind in mid position, and just 2 times the big blind, on the button. Or some players feel exactly the opposite. They'll raise smaller in early position and raise bigger in late position. And I've heard good arguments for and against, pros and cons. My stance on that, really, kind of getting off topic, is I think that if we adjust our ranges correctly, there's really no reason to adjust your pre-flop betting size by position. Although adjusting your bet size in a tournament is just really a function of stack depth, implied odds, and it makes perfect sense to do that. So we're seeing that now. We're seeing dynamic and flexible ranges plus dynamic and flexible raise sizing, instead of just the 3 times the big blind +1 per limper formula that was used in 2007. The best hand used to raise. If I have ace-jack and my opponent raised in late position, I feel like I usually have the best hand, so I'll go 3 times his bet, and he'll usually fold, or he'll call me, or he'll raise. But now, the new school thinking on that is, if I have the best hand and I have position, and especially if you have like a skill edge, pretty good skill edge, then that's just going to be post-flop money. So there's no real reason to raise with hands like ace, jack, and king and queen against the late position open if you have position. because you actually want to take a flop against a weak range in that case. And that, I think, is one of the biggest places where there's been a change or a paradigm shift, a shift in thinking. And it took me a long time to get on board with this idea of range manipulation. But yeah, I'm definitely sold on it now. Basically, what this led to was kind of polarized 3-bet ranges, at least for me. And when I got my mind around the idea that if I 3-bet and he folds, it doesn't matter what my hand is, or if I 4-bet and fold, it doesn't matter what my hand is. And if I 3-bet or 4-bet with a gapping hand that is going to be stronger than his average opening hand, but weaker than the hands he's going to call me with, I'm just basically wasting my hand. So what all that ends up becoming to me is really polarized 3-bet ranges. When my opponent open raises in middle or late position, I'm not going to re-raise with like middle hands like king, queen, and ace, jack, and pocket eights. I'm going to re-raise with garbage hands that can flop equity like ace 2 suited, that are going to have that ace blocker. It's going to block out a lot of the combinations that he can call my 3-bet with. So basically, I'm going to have junk, or I'm going to have like aces, kings, queens, and ace king. You know, I mean, really, that's almost all I'm 3-betting with in position is like queen, queen plus, and ace king plus, ace king. Yeah, just queen, queen plus, and ace king plus. You know, the more raggedy ace x suited hands that block out my opponent's continuing range. So yeah, I've polarized my 3-bets quite a bit. Now, if somebody starts to catch on to that and exploits it, you have to be, again, dynamic and flexible. But I really think that this kind of conceptual change, the idea of manipulating your opponent's range by your actions, leads to, I think, the necessary and kind of logical thought process, the logical conclusion to form from all of this is that we really should have somewhat more polarized 3-bet ranges because we want to take flops in position. And I'm saying when we're in position, and especially against a pretty wide range. But the raise to win the pot, call for pot odds theory and strategy is sort of just obsolete, and now we just raise because it's plus EV to raise. We're not raising for any strict reason other than all of the benefits of raising beat all of the benefits of folding or calling. So if I cannot profitably call, and I think that I can do better than folding, then I raise. And it's because of a whole big group of factors that include post-flop play, and I think that's a really big difference too between old school and new school pre-flop poker, is that old school really treated pre-flop and post-flop as two very different animals. You know, I'm going to play pre-flop, and then if we get to the flop, well, we'll just go from there. Now, some of the dynamics that go into your ranges are things like implied odds and post-flop position, my range versus my opponent's range, what kind of equity am I going to flop? So you sort of are marrying all of those concepts together, and you come up with what I just call it X, like EX, like expectation. Your position, your post-flop skill, all of these things add up to, along with your range, your EX. And if your EX is good enough, then you raise, and if it's not, then you fold. You know, so sometimes you call, but we'll talk about that more as we go. Conceptually, pre-flop play was, always will be, always has been a battle over the blinds. So the old paradigm is a raise. You're just raising because your hand is probably strongest, or you're bluffing. You're calling when you're probably not strongest, but the odds of having or making the best hand on the flop make the call profitable. You're calling usually in the old paradigm, old school paradigm, with like suited connectors and pocket pairs. You're set mining. You're trying to hit a flop. If you thought you had the best hand in 2007, you would re-raise. You know, that's just what the paradigm was. It made total sense to me. I think it made total sense to most of even the top pros. You know, you would re-raise. Your re-raise was just saying, even though you think you have the best hand, I still think my hand is better. And I mean, if there was a 4-bet, that just means, you know, I've got king, king, or ace, ace. And if you cannot beat kings or aces, then you have to fold versus my 4-bet, which was very often an all-in bet. And you know, the new school just takes everything into consideration together, and like I said, we call that like EX. And if raising is plus EV, if you have a positive EX, then you play. You know, if it's better to raise, you raise. If it's better to call, you call. Taking all these things, fold equity, the strength of your range, and by strength I mean not just equity versus random, like what you put into Poker Stove and say, well, my hand is this, and versus a random hand, it has this much equity. It's more important to think of equity versus your opponent's continuing range if he chooses to call you. Equity versus his 3-bet if he decides to raise you. And taking all the post-flop advantages or disadvantages, positional, implied odds, post-flop skill, all of that into consideration together forms this new concept that I'm going to coin here in this video, just called EX, overall X. It's fold equity plus equity versus continue range plus equity versus 3-bet, 4-bet, etc. Plus or a minus post-flop considerations like implied odds, reverse implied odds, position, post-flop skill, all of that. Your EX describes your entire situation and replaces thoughts about just raw hand strength with thoughts about how am I going to play, how is my hand going to play against my opponent's actions. You know, how is my hand going to play, or how does my range play if my opponent raises? How does my range play if he flat calls? Can I flat call and outplay him after the flop? All of these things have really replaced just how good and how strong is my hand. And we really are marrying post-flop and pre-flop. We're looking at No Limit Hold'em now as instead of just a pre-flop and flop turn river game, it's just one big 4th Street game. You've got pre-flop, flop, 4th Street, and 5th Street are just 4 streets, one game. Even like things like floating the flop, which were pretty alien just 10 years ago. I'm starting to do that even pre-flop, you know, sort of floating pre-flop with hands like 8-7 suited against a wide range from the button. But we'll get into that later. So here's some things to think about when we're trying to consider our ranges. Can I fold out better or be called by worse should always be a thought in your brain when you're considering raising. And this goes back to those hands that split the gap between your opponent's likely opening range and what he's likely to continue with. There's no real reason to re-raise pre-flop with ace-jack suited in position against an open raise from the hijack when you're on the button. Take a flop. Are the blinds defending correctly? How does my hand play post-flop? Am I likely to be raised? And do I have a plan when I am raised? Are the blinds worth stealing? Do I have an edge? And is my edge worth pushing? And really just what is my overall EX? That's the concept I wanted to introduce on this video, is kind of getting away from just thinking in terms of inflexible ranges and getting into dynamic ranges based on, like for instance, there are going to be considerations like you know, how well does my hand play post-flop that are going to lead me to maybe call more, where it used to be a raise or fold situation. Or if I think the big blind, the button, and the small blind are not defending much at all, I might open raise any 2 cards from any position. You know, if the table dynamics are just so, raising is always plus EV in that vacuum. But I think I'm going to cut this off here, and we'll pick back up. But I really just wanted to have kind of a bridge to go from nowhere to get into some post-flop strategy. So until next time, good luck.